The full day of sessions and keynotes for Macon Startup Week 2020, the virtual edition. I'm proud to be able to spend the next hour talking to David Cummings about how startup communities can grow and thrive. During the session, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat window and we will work to answer as many of them as possible at the end of the session. To start, let me take a minute to tell you about our guest. David Cummings is an Atlanta-based tech entrepreneur who's founded 10 companies employing thousands of people, including Pardot, SalesLoft, and Terminus. David is also the founder of Atlanta Tech Village, the United States' fourth largest tech hub, and the leading investor in Calendly, the world's most popular scheduling app. After selling Pardot, David was named Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year winner and one of the 100 most influential Atlanteans by Atlanta Business Chronicle. David's a native of Tallahassee, Florida, and he's earned a bachelor's degree of science in economics from Duke University, and he also has an honorary doctorate from Mercer University. Today, we're going to speak with David about his work developing the Atlanta technology startup community and how his work is tied to helping raise over $1 billion for that Atlanta community. So with that, let's welcome David Cummings, who will be spending the next hour with us. Good morning, David.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here. Excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, I really appreciate taking the time, and I appreciate Calendly. It definitely helps us when we're scheduling things for events like this virtually. So glad that program is doing well. So
yeah, it's amazing. Just to think that scheduling app, Calendly, started right here in Georgia, and now it's used by tens of millions of people every single month. Pretty incredible to see the technology created in our state.
And were they an Atlanta Tech Village company originally?
They were. Started back in 2014. It was one of those stories where just an amazing entrepreneur had this idea, just wanted to scratch this itch. You know, in the marketplace, there had been a number of scheduling tools for a long time, and they were more cumbersome, more enterprisey. And so Calendly was really the first one that felt like a consumer application, really felt like the consumerization of IT. And it's been incredible to see the viral distribution of the product and the growth over the years. And so it's just another homegrown success story.
And obviously with Pardot and SalesLoft too, ones that they go at this point, I guess we consider those sort of the old men of the tech startup in Atlanta, right? Those are the sort of the originals.
Yeah, it's fun to reflect on, from a sales and marketing productivity. That's really the overarching theme there between Pardot in the marketing and automation space, SalesLoft in the sales engagement space, and even Calendly. Most of the Calendly users are sales or support or people interfacing with customers or clients. And so really over the past 15 years, we've carved out a really strong position in the Georgia community around productivity tools for sales and marketing to do their job better, faster, cheaper. And so I think we have a lot of runway ahead of us as well in that regard.
Well, so you say 15 years, so that's an amazing duration since Pardot, right? So one of the things I'm always interested in, I know I've heard part of this story, but what made you shift from being that startup entrepreneur focused on building your businesses and those things you were in to sort of, starting ATV and actually started up Georgia now. So what made you take the time to invest in that way in your community?
So the quick backstory is when I was in college, I started a web content management software company, and I was in North Carolina, and our biggest customer when I graduated was a hotel management company in Atlanta. And so following the best practices of today, you want to get as close to the customer as possible. So what better way than to actually move into the office with the customer and sit right next to them? So they became a customer when I was in a different state. I moved to Atlanta after graduating from college, and I literally moved into the office of my biggest customer, and every question they had, every issue, every thought, what should we add to the roadmap, I could bounce it off of the customer in person, right there in the office. And so that was really one of the best decisions that I made. And so we built that business up. We got to a few million of revenue. And then I had this idea based on my experience doing sales and marketing for the content management software that there has to be a better way to do B2B sales and marketing online. At the time, there were a number of great tools focused on the consumer marketer, tools like Google Analytics and MailChimp and others, but there really weren't a set of tools for the business marketer. And so the aha moment for Pardot was really recreating these consumer marketing tools and applying them for the business marketer. And so that was in 2007. The business took off like a rocket ship, and then we sold it in 2012 to ExactTarget, which is one of the largest online marketing companies. They were focused on the consumer email side of things, and obviously we were on the business side, so it was a really complementary match. And then 7 months after that, Salesforce.com acquired ExactTarget. And so now Pardot's been part of Salesforce.com. When we sold the business, we had a little over 100 employees, and we had a little over 13 million of recurring revenue. Today, Pardot has 500 million of recurring revenue. As a standalone company today, it would be worth $10 billion. And I'm just thrilled that the product still is thriving, is growing, is a really popular name within the B2B marketing world. And so after selling the business in 2012, I really wanted to scratch an itch that I had had for a number of years. When I moved to Georgia from North Carolina back in 2002, I had a really difficult time plugging into a tech startup community. Back then, there was no Twitter. Blogging wasn't very popular. It was hard to find like-minded entrepreneurs. And so one of the things that I had in the back of my mind was, let's build a large community, starting with a building, and let's make it as inclusive, let's make it as open and inviting as possible. And so once I sold the business back in 2012, I immediately went shopping for a building. I wanted to buy a big building and make it home to as many entrepreneurs as possible. And so I bought what is now the Atlanta Tech Village. We have 103,000 square feet. We have over 300 startups in the one building. It's in Buckhead, right near Lenox Mall, right off of Georgia 400. And to date, we've helped over 2,000 startups. The 2,000 startups have raised over $1 billion of equity. The startups that are in the building or have graduated from the building are valued at over $6 billion. And they've helped create directly and indirectly over 7,000 jobs in Georgia. And so this idea for creating community, I originally thought that it was going to be more of a smaller, quieter community. It would be a bunch of entrepreneurs helping each other out. What I found is that entrepreneurs are very good at one thing. They might be good at sales or marketing or support or fundraising or product development. And entrepreneurs are also very glass half full types. They're very optimistic. They're very willing to help others. And so by having hundreds of entrepreneurs under the same roof, they naturally help each other. They naturally pay it forward. And so this pay it forward culture, combined with just so many interesting people, has really created a recipe for success that's, really exceeded all of my expectations. So here we are 8 years later, and things are humming along nicely.
Well, so just to reframe it for the middle of Georgia sort of part of this conversation, I wish we had a 108,000 square foot building that we can even consider acquiring. Maybe there are a couple of industrial properties, but if you think about just taking the scale out, what worked that maybe a smaller community should sort of look to latch onto? So you went out and took a building, made it inexpensive for entrepreneurs to come in. You gave them love and support. I'm assuming a few of them you gave them the love and support to go do something else, and others you sort of nurtured along. But what of that is sort of taking scale out, sort of the core of what made that work?
So a couple things. One that I've seen, and I think we got it right by happenstance, a number of communities have tried to create a tech village equivalent. They've tried to create an incubator or an innovation center. And a piece of advice that I emphasize is that when the building opens, when the community opens, it's really important to have anchor tenants, to have startups or entrepreneurs or agencies, creative types that are in there during normal conditions. Obviously, everything's changed with the pandemic, but during normal conditions, when we opened the Tech Village, we had 10 startups from day one that represented about 50 employees. And so when we opened the building, we had energy. We had excitement. We had crazy entrepreneurs that would love to pitch you their elevator pitch from day one. And so as other entrepreneurs came in to check it out, they could see like-minded people. As people in the community, whether it was government or whether it was other business leaders, as they came in, they could see and hear the crazy entrepreneur stories. And so having that energy and excitement from day one was one of the best things that we did. Because then when you came through and you did a tour of the tech village, you had this feeling that it was something greater than just a building. You had this feeling that this was an opportunity to actually create the future. And so it's hard to manufacture a feeling. It's cool, you can make a nice looking building, but to actually walk away from it and be like, wow, I want to be a part of that. Or wow, that building has energy. That's something that's really hard to manufacture. And so my number one piece of advice is, if you're going to do a building for the community, make sure that you can get 20, 30, 40 full-time people in the door on day one, because that sets the tone going forward.
So obviously energy and excitement, have everybody together. Do you feel like you have to have a single, is it important and critical in your sort of view of this to have a single location for entrepreneurs to be collaborating and connecting, or can it be done with different sort of spheres of influence, right? I mean, some community now in Atlanta, you've got, probably over 100, co-working and entrepreneur centers around Atlanta. So do they all come from ATV out, or is it sort of just, is it okay for there to be people to be in many centers around a community?
I think you need a critical mass. So whatever that critical mass is, if I had to guess, I would say a critical mass would be somewhere in the 20 to 30,000 square feet of space. And so that critical mass, what I've seen is it provides enough resources to have things like a full-time events manager, somebody who's constantly putting on programs and events. It provides a critical mass to be able to have investors come to town, go to one building and have 5 productive meetings in a row without having to drive anywhere else. And so I think you can have multiple locations, but I think one needs to be the flagship. One needs to be the shining trophy of the community. That's the default. And so it is possible, but I would recommend having one anchor and then having the satellites off of it.
Well, you mentioned agencies earlier too. So does Atlanta Tech Village partner with, whether it's, the SBA through SCORE or one of their other programming and chambers? Do they come to the village to work with you, or do y'all go out to those sort of support agencies, the universities, the angel investors? Are they there with you, or are they sort of coming and going from the?
They're all here with us.
Okay.
So we allocate 20% of the building to tech-related service providers or community members. So the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce has space in the Tech Village. Emory University, their entrepreneurship program, has space at the Tech Village. Mercer did for a long time. And so this idea is that anything that's related to the tech creative industry, there's an opportunity to have a place at the village, but again, no more than 20% of the building. And so that also does include service providers and agencies. It includes PR firms and web design firms. It includes things like the Atlanta Technology Angels, right? So ATA is one of the largest angel investment groups, and it's based out of the Tech Village. So 80% of the space for startups, 20% for the service providers in the community. And the goal is to have it all under the same roof.
Makes it easy for you to have the hallway and elevator conversations around needs and interests and sort of connecting points. Is that what that helps create?
That's right. And it gives us scale for things like mentors, coaching, things like continuing education, panel discussions. What I mentioned before about investors coming to town. An investor might be coming to town to meet with one startup, and because there's 300 in the building, it makes it easy for them to start to develop rapport and relationships with other startups that could lead to something down the line as well.
So you talked about programming a little while ago. help me understand better so you've got the space. We provide physical assets to entrepreneurs that are invited or take up residence there. The programming, is it just sort of loose community driven programming? Is it intentional incubation programming, or is it acceleration programming, or is it a sum of all?
So a third of the programming comes from the Tech Village, open to the public, put on by our full-time events manager. And some of those programs are things like the Startup Chowdown, just a weekly networking lunch. Anybody can come, open to the public, every Friday at noon. And so a typical Friday pre-pandemic, we would have 250 people come have lunch with each other just as a weekly networking event. And then we have a number of other programs that we put on. We put on the It Takes a Village program. So it's focused exclusively on underrepresented founders. And so we have 10 startups that come through the program. It's completely free. And it's a 10-week program, just like a normal accelerator, but it's, again, exclusively for underrepresented founders. And we present it as a pre-accelerator. So it's a program to get everything in place to then apply to an accelerator like Techstars or Y Combinator or any of the number of accelerators that are out there.
And that one's open. You have that one open for application right now again?
We do. Yeah, we're working on our 6th cohort now. So we've been doing it for a number of years.
Okay.
And then we have a 30-person volunteer mentor team. And so we have programs that the mentors put on that we help facilitate based on their areas of expertise. So it could be lawyers, it could be accountants, it could be search engine optimization experts, it could be software architecture experts. So a team of 30 volunteer mentors that we manage and then partner with them to put on free programs for the community. So a third of the overall programs we put on with our full-time and internal staff, and then 2/3 of the programs come from the community. And that could be other organizations in town that do their events. It could be third parties like other tech companies that are wanting to put on programs to build their own community. And it's worked really well so far. I'm anxious for the pandemic to wrap up so we can get back together in person, but we've been doing our best virtually for, since March of this year.
Well, talk about that. So how have y'all pivoted the program? Has it just been like this today? This conversation we would have loved for you to have come to Macon and sat in the Sports Hall of Fame with us or wherever else we were sitting and talked face to face. So have you just pivoted everything just to an online platform? Has that worked well for y'all's programming?
It's been okay. We have done that. So we have a number of Slack channels. We have a number of Zoom groups. A few of the things that we did in person and we still do now virtually, we have what's called the 7-figure club. So all the startups in the building that have $1 million of revenue or $1 million or more of funding, we get together every quarter and share best practices and ideas and what's going on. And so obviously before we would get together for lunch every quarter and talk through those different topics. And so now we just do it over Zoom. So we're continuing the programs and the initiatives that we had, but of course everything's virtually, and it's just not as fun, but it's still better than nothing. So we get back to the normal world.
A community like Macon's looking to sort of build. We're looking to build our community, and I think we have a great community of good doers here in Macon. We talk about good doers versus do-gooders, and we have a lot of people who've leaned in and done a lot of heavy lifting in those initial phases. And I think we have a very supportive ecosystem of universities and the chambers and I believe even our government who are looking to support that in different facets. If you were to sort of dropped into a smaller, I'd call it a second-tier city, and asked to sort of start it outside of a single facility and lots of energy, what are the other things that sort of need to be sort of shepherded into life, right? Buildings, community pulled together to create energy. What's next? What are the other sort of key themes that a community should look for to do? If I was parachuted in, the first thing that I would do is I would find the 5 entrepreneurs that have startups currently that care about growing the community. And those 5 entrepreneurs, whoever they might be, I would work to convince them to meet every week for lunch.
every week. And every week at lunch with the 5 entrepreneurs representing, startups in town. And then I would just listen. What are the opportunities? What's working? What's not working? What are you looking forward to? What are you not looking forward to? And I'm sure it'd be questions and conversations around talent, around fundraising, around go-to-market strategies, acquiring customers. And so I'd really just start with a small nucleus of doers, using your language. And I would just spend as much time as possible on as recurring a schedule as possible and just listen. And what I found is that all the important things are going to come out of those conversations, and really just building that community from the smallest core. So I'm a big fan of the 10 raving fans type concept. And people are like, oh, I can go get 1,000 Twitter followers. But if nobody cares, then it doesn't matter. I'd rather have 10 Twitter followers that absolutely are passionate about what you say and do versus 1,000 that don't care. And so I would take that same type of concept and find the 5 or 10 entrepreneurs that are in the arena, that are competing. And I would just spend as much time as possible and start from there as the nucleus of the community.
So if you take those 5 or 10, and it's funny you say that 5 or 10, I sort of look at the Macon startup effort. This was it's by entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs, right? That's what Techstars requires. And so this program is effectively put on by those who are neither paid nor probably started off wanting to do this. So if we have that nucleus of entrepreneurs, do you invite the support organizations? So do you invite your universities and chambers and other support organizations to be part of that dialogue to help them craft the work? Because we have in place organizations that are doing work today. Do you bring them along in that dialogue to make sure that we're taking what's being done and funded to match what is desired and needed?
I take the approach that I think you alluded to, which is it should be entrepreneur-led. It should not be government or quasi-government-led. And so I like to partner with the entrepreneurs and just do stuff, whatever we see that needs to be done. And then what I've found is that when we're doing stuff and good things are happening, jobs are being created, capital funding's coming to the region, then the chambers of commerce and the government and quasi-government organizations, they say, hey, they're doing good stuff. They mean well. They want to grow the community. They want to create good jobs. They want to create wealth in the community. I find that the other organizations are quick to fall in line and want to help. So again, I would start by providing value to the community, being entrepreneur-led, and then as the community is pushing forward, seeking out the chamber and government and universities to fill in the gaps or do the things that they do well. And so it does become a very symbiotic community, but I do think it should be entrepreneur-led.
So you sound like, and maybe I'm going to overstep in asking this, so you sound like you're a fan of Brad Fell's, the startup community.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I know you started by acquiring the building. I heard the story when you came and spoke at Mercer about the blinding light coming across. I think you said driving 400 when you first saw the building. But what sustains it now? If you sort of went and started it, is what key? I mean, this is not an inexpensive operation to run, and I know you don't charge exorbitant rents. How do you fund ongoing support at that scale, or any scale really? That at an initial point isn't profit driven, right? I mean, I'm assuming at some point this isn't about making another dollar; it's about providing support. Where does that? How do you sustain that? 'Cause at some point, it's got to find some inertia.
That's right. So the building, I paid for the building and paid for the renovation. So having a benevolent benefactor helps for sure. And then from a community point of view, because of paying for the building without a mortgage on it, the ability to make money off of it, even though it was much below market standards at the time, that money was then used to hire people to help grow the community. So to put it another way, the rents that we charge are about 30% less than market rent, but we still do charge rent. But because there's no mortgage on the building, by charging 30% less, we're still able to make a modest profit. And that modest profit is used to pay for the staff to do the programs, to do the mentoring, to do the obviously upkeep of the building. And so it has become really from day one, once we opened the door, it's been completely self-sustaining by charging rent that's 30% less than market.
So you're not beholden to any outside sort of sponsorship funders or any other governmental funding to allow it to operate. I'm assuming some of the programming comes through some of those pieces, but the base operation you're saying is literally self-sustaining. And then do you bring outside partners in for sponsors for specific programs or project-oriented pieces?
That's right. That's right. So pre-pandemic, we had about $250,000 a year coming in from sponsors, and those sponsors would sponsor different programs. And so again, whether it was a law firm sponsoring a series of legal related courses or continuing education, or the local, Silicon Valley Bank as an example. So your typical service providers that focus on the tech startup sector, they were the go-to for the sponsorship side. But again, the building and the community and the staff is fully self-sustaining. So
you write an incredible amount. I envy the amount of time and energy you place in your blog and your writing, and I appreciate the fact you do it, because it's something that I find in every nugget, even ones that aren't my area of interest. I find little nuggets, but one of them you spoke about entrepreneurial communities and development, what was necessary, and you talked about wage growth and exports as being other keys to an entrepreneurial community's development. I mean, we've had a little dialogue here locally, but I'd love to get a little more, because you dropped them in, but what do you mean when you talk about wage growth and exports for an entrepreneurial community? Why are those keys to a successful community?
That's a great question. I think that word export is not used enough when it comes to the tech startup communities. And so the big idea there is that technology by its very nature is something that is for a national audience, if not for a global audience. You're not going to write a content management system that's just going to be used by the 10 local businesses. It just doesn't work that way. And so one of the things that I think needs to be talked about more is that tech companies and startups are very different than your Main Street businesses. We all need the Main Street businesses. We all need the flower shop on the corner, but the flower shop on the corner is rearranging revenue that might have gone to the grocery store or might have gone to the other flower shop across town. And so most businesses are Main Street businesses, and Main Street businesses mostly shuffle revenue around in the community, whether it's accountants or lawyers or doctors. We need all these important people, but they don't grow the average wages of the community. If Macon tomorrow got 100 more doctors, there's not 100 more doctors worth of work to be done. And so there's not 100 more doctors worth of wages to be paid. It would just be less wages for the existing doctors. Technology and technology startups are completely different. If tomorrow Macon had a new startup that had 100 employees making $150,000 a year each, exporting software around the nation, around the world, that's new dollars, net new dollars that came to the community. And those net new dollars with those high average wages are then used for all of the Main Street jobs. So all those new employees making high wages are then spending those dollars on the flower shop, on the doctors, on the lawyers, on the contractors for their houses. And so bringing dollars to the region, the only way to do that is through exporting something. And tech startups, by their very nature, are exporting technology outside of the region. So export's a word that we should use more often when talking about startups.
So it's funny about startups, and I'll pivot this out of some of your area of expertise just to make a comment for the community. So there's an effort here called One Macon, where a group of individuals got together and they began to craft a vision for Macon in 4 years, and we're to a second cycle of it. And one of the leaders this time, one of the tri-chairs, is David Thompson, who actually sat me down as somebody who's more tech focused and more, what I consider traditional entrepreneurial focused. And we have a thriving art and culture scene with our museums and our resources around the arts. And he actually posed a statement that said, if you go to the Keys and acquire a painting of the beach and bring it back, you exported the art and they imported your wealth. And so we actually have a creative economy component here in our community that's being worked on that we see as in line with the traditional entrepreneurship. So it fits in that export, right? We export the experience, the come and attend something and leave the wealth behind, whether it be art, experiences, and yes, like you said, technology is the same way. They export the thing and import the wealth, which grows the base to then grow the Main Street piece. And so, and you're saying wage growth from the idea of bringing in these high-paying jobs that are exporting the resource. Is that where the wage growth piece comes in?
That's right. That's right. So revenue coming from exports is new revenue to the region. And then obviously the salaries that support that new revenue to the region is new salaries. And then they have all of their normal Main Street business expenses. And so it becomes a virtuous cycle. And so again, the big idea is more startups equals more exports, which equals more wages for the region, which helps increase everybody's wages for the region.
So when we think about the regions, and we do think regional, right? Middle Georgia, you'll hear us say Middle Georgia a lot. So while this is Macon Startup Week, we do believe this is Middle Georgia Startup Week, that it covers our surrounding communities, whether it be Houston County, Warner Robins with our base, or even us here. But so you think about our region versus the Atlanta region. I think there's always a little bit of friendly competition and concern about how do we attract people. And so many especially tech entrepreneurs see the Atlanta Tech Village and the Atlanta community as the place they need to be. What would you tell us that everybody says find a niche and focus on it. I always say yes, that we should do that. But generally, critical mass problems, is there something you're seeing the secondary cities do well that allow them to attract, but also, in my opinion, retain entrepreneurs versus having them get exported out to other communities, whether it be RTP or Atlanta or to the West Coast? Is there something that you've seen in the smaller communities that we could be focused on to allow us to be a very viable and interesting to the right entrepreneurial startup?
Absolutely. It's quality of life, right? Even in Atlanta with the pandemic, the traffic is still bad. At rush hour, you're still sitting on the connector, and the traffic's down 30% from pre-pandemic. So I think quality of life is the area to focus on, especially in the context of work from anywhere, work from home, virtual work, remote work. I think, one of the things that Chattanooga did that I thought was really interesting is they went out and said, hey, any programmer that makes more than 80 grand a year that moves to Chattanooga will contribute $10,000 towards your down payment on your house. So it's literally a community initiative to pay programmers to move to Chattanooga. And so obviously thinking about it from a long-term perspective, the more programmers you have in the community, the more startups that are going to start down the road. It might not be in year one, but if you have more technical talent, more technical things are going to happen. And so I thought that was a really neat initiative that Chattanooga is doing. And obviously Macon and Middle Georgia has that same opportunity. Great quality of life, great can-do attitude, great, low cost of living. And so how do you get the technical, creative talent that can work from anywhere now, especially because of the pandemic?
That's right.
How to motivate them to take a peek at Macon and then fall in love with it and then build their families and careers there. So I think that's a unique opportunity that, COVID-19 has really opened up.
So we've talked about how we can, import talent, how we attract the opportunities to our community. And I'm not sure how much time you've spent thinking about this subject, but you and I talked a while ago about you having young children, and I do too. I have two little girls that are 11 and 8, and I've begun to become curious around the entrepreneur in the making, the development of entrepreneurial talents, right? Our base systems build great employees, and I think we have a thriving university set systems here in Middle Georgia, and I think our K-12 schools, both public and private, are working very hard to deliver great education. But have you spent any time starting to think about what it is we do at the correct age? I think there's an incorrect age too, but the correct age to help develop the entrepreneurial leaning so that we can identify those that might or should consider entrepreneurship, so that they take that leap more effectively and sooner? Is that something you've looked at?
Two pieces of advice that I've received from friends and acquaintances. One is the value of manual labor, hard work, whether it's mowing the grass or it's picking weeds or cleaning the kitchen after, having dinner every night. So that was one piece of advice that I got from a friend that I've taken to heart. And then another piece of advice is around asking the kids on a daily or weekly basis, what are some things that they've tried that didn't work, some things that failed, and making so that failure is completely fine, right? If you think about our K-12 system in the United States, it's really designed to focus the kids on not failing. Did you get 100 on your spelling test? Yes or no? And so everything is oriented around following the directions and getting a grade on how well you did against what was expected of you. And so the main point here is trying to counterbalance that, knowing that the real world is full of failures, knowing that entrepreneurship is all about failure in an effort to then succeed. And so making sure that there's some systems or at least some regular questions to make it okay for the kids to know that failure is normal and part of life, and that you want to encourage them to take risks. And so that's my 2 cents. Manual labor plus highlighting failure as a good thing to counteract the K through 12 way of thinking.
Our maker space that started a number of years ago actually used to have part of this K-12 ethos that was failure was not a terminal condition. And so that was something that we looked at. I actually asked my children every night that question. I asked them, so what did you enjoy? What did you succeed at? And what did you fail at today? And what will you do better tomorrow? And so yes, I'm with you. There's that dialogue around teaching that it's okay to fall down. It's the getting up that's important.
Yeah, one of the ways that I like to talk about it that I got from somebody a long time ago is there's, in life, there's one-way doors and two-way doors. Most of the things in life are two-way doors. You can go back through the door you came in if it doesn't work. If you go try to ride that bike and you skin your knee, it's no big deal. And very rarely are there one-way doors. Once you go through that door, there is no coming back. And so I want to make sure that I emphasize to my kids that most things are two-way doors. Most things are things that you can take a risk on. And if it doesn't work out, it's no big deal. It's much better to have taken that risk that you believed in within reason than it is to not take that risk. And so life is mostly two-way doors and the occasional one-way door.
So David, we start heading towards the back half of our time, and I want to make sure we do have a chance to answer questions. So I'm curious. So this is, again, the front ring sort of question, right? So what is the book we should all be reading right now? Is there a book that you think every entrepreneur should read, or is there one you've recently read that just sort of spoke to you in a way that we need to all discover?
So I love books. I love snacking on books. So I'm not one to read it cover to cover unless it's amazing, but I love having 4 or 5 books at a time. And then when I sit down to read, I like to say, what am I interested in today? And so go read a chapter from that book. So snacking on books is something I'm a fan of. Right now, the books that I'm snacking on, one is called Americana. So it's the 400 Years of Capitalism in the United States. Really well done, really interesting. One of the books that I'm snacking on right now is Gentleman in Moscow, just a fun story of this gentleman that lived for 50 years in one single hotel and never left the hotel.
Okay.
And so some of the ones that I'd recommend on the entrepreneur front, on the story side, just to be inspired, just to see what it feels and looks like. My favorite one is Shoe Dog, about the founder of Nike. Just an incredible stories, the highs and lows. People see Nike as this, multi-billion-dollar mega business. But if you read the stories, the first 20 years of Nike was just about getting by. It was just about having a little shoe business because you couldn't find the shoes that you wanted. And then it got bigger and bigger. And then Michael Jordan. And then post Michael Jordan, it became this massive thing. But reading the story of Nike, the Shoe Dog book is just incredible. On the tactical level, if somebody said, hey, I'm a new entrepreneur, I'm out there trying to figure things out. One that doesn't get talked about much and is very simple is the mom test. So I would pick up the mom test on the Kindle. And the general premise there is that when entrepreneurs are out there doing customer discovery, they're trying to find authentic demand in the market. Most of the time, the entrepreneurs are leading the witness. They're asking questions that are not the right questions. They need to be much more objective. They need to do it in a way that's going to increase the chance of getting real answers and not what I call happy ear answers. So happy ear answers are when you ask somebody a question in a way to get the answer that you want. And again, entrepreneurs are optimistic and enthusiastic. And so happy ears is a challenge with entrepreneurs. So the MOM test is a really tactical one. And then, of course, there's so many good ones around the lean startup and customer discovery. This idea that entrepreneurs should not build a product in a vacuum, right? That's one of the most common mistakes I see at the Tech Village. Common mistake number one is that they have an idea, like a field of dreams, and they build a field of dreams and nobody shows up. And that happens the vast majority of the time. And most common issue number two that I see at the Tech Village is entrepreneurs build a product that's a nice to have, not a must have. The product is only 10% better than what's on the market. It's not 10 times better than what's on the market. So those are the two most common problems I see. Building something in a vacuum without input from the market, and then building something that's only incrementally better and not revolutionary for the market.
Okay, so pivoting out of the entrepreneurial to the community side, because again, I'm hoping we have a lot of our entrepreneurial community, operators. Again, I know there's the support organization we talked about earlier, but besides the startup community, Brad Feld's book, are there any other books or sort of resources that you would point us as a group of good doers towards that would help us accelerate the community faster?
Brad Feld has the best book on it, right? You've already mentioned it. It already talks about how it takes a village. It takes all kinds of people. It talks about being entrepreneur-led. So that's my favorite on this subject here. So I would just keep spreading the word and trying to get more people to read it.
Yeah, I think I've contributed to his bestseller status by handing that book out. I've only gotten it back one time, but most of the time the book has moved itself along in that way too. So that's fantastic. So again, coming towards the back end, what have we failed to ask you that we need to hear? Is there anything that I haven't asked you that that this group needs to be able to hear from you to sort of help impart that wisdom for us to gain the value of your precious time?
I think the emphasis on the university, whether it's Mercer or other universities and colleges in Middle Georgia, I think that's really an area that just has tremendous potential because for obvious reasons, you have this naturally recurring pipeline of talent, right? You have this steady flow of young, energetic minds. And so I think that's an area of opportunity, right? So most places don't have an amazing university like a Mercer and then all the other great schools in Middle Georgia. So if you think about other places, they have universities, they have colleges, but they don't have one as strong as that one. And so I think from a community point of view, whatever you can do to heighten the entrepreneurial activity on campus and connect that activity on campus with the community, I think that's going to pay dividends down the road.
So this is the entrepreneurial community going into the university to support their focuses around entrepreneurial development, entrepreneurial clubs, giving into the university to hope to attract and retain the students that come from that who seek the entrepreneurial experience afterwards. Is that the sort of cycle you're talking about?
Right. As you know, it's really hard to get somebody to move to a community that they're not familiar with. And so by being students in the community already, after 1, 2, 3, 4 years, they're clearly familiar with the community. And so the chance of getting them to stay is 100 times higher than getting somebody random to move to the community. And so ideas around helping them start their business while they're in school versus saying, no, just wait until you graduate. Ideas around connecting the local business community with whether the students are as employees or interns, or the students have built their own startups and they're looking for customers. So again, one of the messages I would leave behind is that the reason I'm in Atlanta is because when I was in North Carolina, a random company in Atlanta became my customer and I wanted to be close to my customer. So I moved to Atlanta. I could have moved anywhere, but I moved to Atlanta because my customer was there. So how can Middle Georgia become more customers for the student startups, which is exactly what happened with me, so that when their customer is already there, they don't want to leave. And
it's funny. So Mercer University has an innovation center for the students, and we have actually several really good success stories between Z Beans Coffee that started there and has actually now moved into the community, owns multiple locations here. It's a Main Street business, but Shane could have taken his roasting business anywhere and opened Main Street locations to support it. But I think that was he had a product that the university helped him get into the business community because he did it in a way that we all drink lots of coffee. And then I think the other side of the equation was our Andrew Eck with our Georgia Artisan, that was a local engineering graduate who actually graduated with an engineering degree and ends up now, he runs an artisan furniture business here in town, as one of the good doers in the community. They both actually are, but there are a number of those stories where you're right. How do we accelerate more of that connective tissue across all of our university component? So one question we got asked that I want to come back to, from a tech community perspective, the ecosystem for technology. We actually have, it's funny, people always say we don't have much of a tech software development community here. And I always laugh and go, I can name at least 6 and I don't mind thinking about it yet. But it's very quiet, right? They've been here before there was a community to connect them into, Reeves Software, LBAware, BA that's here in town. They're here and they serve, you said customers not in our community. They struggle to find talent. They have to hire talent from out of town. What advice would you give them and us in support of them to attract that talent? I mean, so we talk about having a great pace of life, right? We've got a great urban core. We've got a great pace of life. I think we have natural resources and other resources that would be fantastic reasons to be here. How do we go outside of Middle Georgia and make that larger community of developers aware of what we have here and the reason they should come? Is there any advice around how we get our broadcast, our message out better?
I would go back to taking the 20-year horizon and work to develop that talent locally, work to develop internally, right? Start with the high schools, start with teaching computer science in the high schools, both public and private. Focus more community resources around that technical development. And so I would take more of the 20-year horizon and try to grow the talent locally, both talent that's there from the K through 12, as well as talent that comes to town through the colleges and universities in Middle Georgia. And so recruiting outside talent, I think, is always worth a shot, but I think you have a higher success rate if you'll take the 20-year horizon and work harder to nurture and grow your own talent.
And I know a number of the organizations do that, right? It's not an either or, it's an and then. And yeah, the 20-year, growing an oak tree takes 20 years, and many times we don't see the shade or the effort we put into it. But the long tail is absolutely being out. And know those organizations I mentioned earlier are out in our universities, finding the talent they can attract to stay that are already here, making some experience with it. Y'all do a great job with the Started Up Georgia and the brand Atlanta Tech Village has. My assumption is, to a degree, setting aside our Georgia Tech, Georgia State attraction, is it just the fact that you have to continue to beat your own drum loud enough for others to hear it? I mean, we know of you from a distance, so assumptively, is it also we have to do things like you're doing today and tell our stories beyond our borders as much as we can?
It is. And thanks for mentioning Started Up Georgia. Started Up Georgia is something that we kicked off at the Tech Village a few months ago. And the idea is, because everybody's working virtually now, everybody's working from home, what can we do to help entrepreneurs all across the state of Georgia? And so we partnered with a number of chambers of commerce across the state. And we had over 700 entrepreneurs sign up for the 10-week program. And so we had guest speakers every week. We had small accountability groups with a mentor that would facilitate the discussions. And so we finished up our first cohort last month, and then we're going to look to launch here next year our next cohort. And so from a Started Up Georgia point of view and the virtual world that we're living in right now because of the pandemic, I actually think it creates more connectivity across the state. The feedback that we got from doing our first cohort of 700 plus entrepreneurs in Georgia was, really about meeting other entrepreneurs. It was really the small group, meeting with 15 people every week over Zoom, building the relationships there, getting to hear the stories, getting to hear what the other entrepreneurs are working on, and then developing those relationships that exist beyond the program. So I think using technology, of course, we can continue to do great things to increase the connectivity from the entrepreneur communities all across the state. So I don't think it's limited to any one region. And I think Started Up Georgia was a great first step.
So you obviously focus on the question that came through. We'll begin to wrap this up. It's an interesting one. So you have a technology-focused facility there. If someone came in with tangible product idea, I mean, pick anything idea-wise, how do y'all help direct? Are there other centers of sort of influence and focus and gravity around the product base? If someone wanted to invent the next, coffee cup, where do we send? How do you help them reach their community? Is it still there with you, or is there other centers that you see around the tangible product areas?
We would point them in different directions depending on what they were doing. There's a center downtown that's more focused on social impact. So think of nonprofits and think of helping the community as the focus. There's another center that's focused more on creative types. So think of web design, graphic design. There's another center that's focused on retail. So think of technologies and otherwise for retailers and helping retailers. And then, of course, Georgia Tech has the ATDC, which is anything technology related. The Tech Village, we define a tech company as a company that has proprietary software or hardware. And by and large, it's proprietary software. So 97% of the startups at the Tech Village are software startups. And then that other 3% are doing some hardware or hardware-enabled software. So that's an area that we see. We call it HESAS, hardware-enabled software as a service. And so one example is a company at the Tech Village that invented a device that you plug into vending machines to send all the data to the cloud. And so millions of vending machines, they don't talk to the internet. You plug this device in, now they talk to the internet for the purposes of inventory and cash collections and so on and so forth. So we define it as proprietary technology, hardware or software, but it's almost all software.
Well, David, we're coming to the end. I think I've done a good job of keeping up with the questions, and I appreciate Arian continuing to feed those to us as we went. Assuming I don't see those pop up in the next minute, just to be honorable of the time for everybody, including you. Is there any last thoughts you want to leave us with?
My parting thought is that entrepreneurship is, in my humble opinion, one of the greatest forces of good in society. This idea of creating jobs, this idea of creating wealth, this idea of having great cultures in the business that really becomes life training. The cultures in the business that get taken back out to the schools, to the churches, to the community organizations. And so I really believe that entrepreneurship is a force for good. And my life's mission is really to help spread that message around entrepreneurship. So I really appreciate you having me today and appreciate the time together.
Well, David, thank you. I do really appreciate the fact that you were willing to be so gracious with your time. And I agree with you. I think the greatest force we can have in a community is building great organizations that provide great community. And we hope that we will take at least nuggets of what you have here, if not all of it, and figure out the way that Middle Georgia builds our own beacon that allows us to be a great center for entrepreneurs in a community that has a thriving, ecosystem that leads us forward. And so thank you for planting those seeds today. And we look forward to having you notice this again from your tower at some point, maybe being able to see the light we're putting out. So thank you again very much. Just to let everybody know, please don't forget about the networking events that are coming up. Also, Robert Grant will be putting on a session here shortly. So we hope we see everybody at the next session. And again, these sessions are being recorded for us to have in the future. So those of you who can't make them, you won't totally miss them. But if you don't make them live, you miss a lot of value here. But again, please be sure to tune back in. Check the calendar at MaconStartupWeek.com for the remainder of the day. We will be here through 6 p.m. We do have our pitch event at the end of the day are 2 individuals that were chosen to pitch for $1,000 in cash and prizes. And then Damon Johns will be our closeout here at 6 p.m. And so with that, I will wish all you guys a good rest of your afternoon. And David, thank you again. And we look forward to seeing you soon.
Great. Thank you.